Okay, welcome back to Bounce Around Charleston. Well, my next guest is here. Ashley Krejci-Shaw has a company called Intermediate Planning, and she's going to tell us how she's doing work in our communities. Ashley, welcome to Bounce Around Charleston.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, tell us, what is intermediate planning?
So intermediate planning is a mindful, minority-owned consultancy that helps top-level decision makers who are pursuing a change process of some kind. And so typically we work with clients who are wanting to make sure that they're working ethically and non-discriminately, essentially to better serve the people that they care about or they have a responsibility to. And so the way that we do that is that we have what I call sort of these common sense sort of research practices, evaluations, and analysis. And what that does is it helps sort of set a new tone and set a new approach for more honest work and more honest interactions with their stakeholders. And also we work with people who tend to have the authority for change and to initiate change, but often don't have, say, the certainty to do it. And so where intermediate makes a big difference is we are able to use our skills and our approaches to help them gain confidence.
Okay, explain your background and how it fuels you to do this in our communities.
Well, I think really what led up to this work sort of starts in my childhood, so my upbringing. So I was raised on an island off the west coast of Canada, and I grew up in a province that is very rich in natural resources and cultural capital. And it was always instilled in me that, you use resources wisely. You don't squander them. Resources are finite. And again, that was just a value that was instilled in me and my peers growing up. So with that being said, I feel that played a huge role, but then also I would say my parents, because typically, like, we often talk about decision makers being responsible and the influence that they can have, either a good influence or a bad one. And so, for instance, my own father is a Czechoslovakian man. He's since passed, but my father was Czechoslovakian and essentially left his homeland as a result of being sort of dissatisfied with the politics during that time. He was in his 20s. It was the late 60s, around something we call the Prague Spring, and he left. And as a consequence, for leaving, he wasn't able to return for about 20 years. And I saw how that had a profound effect on him. And then I had my mother, on the other hand, who is from the South. She's a child of the Civil Rights Movement. She was born in a house on Liberty Hill, and grew up very acutely aware of the politics around her, primarily because of my grandfather, who was very active in exercising his own agency, belonged to a lot of associations in Charleston, and essentially taught them to stand up for themselves and obviously to stand up against anti-Black policy. So on a home sort of front, that has influenced me. But then I'll end here. When I first started out very early in my career, I had a lot of exposure to leaders and organizations and decision making, and it became very clear to me that not every leader is equipped to do this work. Not every leader has the empathy or the qualifications to be a manager of change of sorts. And so I saw an opportunity, and essentially that was, I think, the spark that led me in this direction.
Okay, now, two things. You talked about your grandfather and you talked about Liberty Hill. I'm wondering, who was your grandfather? Because I'm quite sure many of our viewers will probably know who your grandfather was.
John Riggins.
John Riggins. Okay, now.
And I have come across people in the community who know who he is and remember him. Yes.
Okay, and then a lot of what you do in the community surrounds sustainable development.
Yes, sir.
So we need to define that word, sustainable development.
So sustainable development is what I would refer to as a principle and also a strategic approach. It is a way of looking at situations and looking at need and making responsible decisions with people who have either demonstrated a need or have communicated a need. And some other examples of what that might look like would be, for example, unpacking community concerns. There could be a high profile incident or something that is causing turmoil among a group of people. So be unpacking that. It could be evaluating programs that have been there could be a level of dissatisfaction that's been voiced, concerns about lack of impact. Another example might be assessing workplace dynamics, for instance, and communication norms that can become problematic, especially among diverse teams.
In reading some of your information, you wrote a term here: institutions don't change, people do. Explain that.
Okay, so institutions don't change what people do. That was my way. That's a slogan I came up with, and it was my way of sort of communicating that I believe that we're all sort of guilty of sort of not really looking at the fullness of what an institution is in terms of its definition. We can think of it as either like a building or maybe a brand, but really what it is just a group of people who are working collectively either for one or two objectives that they have or with shared values. And it also speaks to, I think, the work that we're so often a part of, which is we work with leaders who are interested in transformational change. And so transformational change is change that happens, within individuals. It happens internally within oneself. And so the idea is that real change happens from the inside out and not the outside in. So I guess with that being said, it can lend itself to certain strategies. Just the idea that like investing in your stakeholders is really, really important in researching them, understanding the people that you're working with. One, because I really don't believe that these days it's sufficient to know like the basics of someone that you're working with. I mean, I think quality relationships, you have to understand people's value systems. And so that's one benefit of learning your stakeholders a little bit more. But then also too, stakeholder research can also help you understand where the people around you are sort of positioned. I mean, are they going to help you or are they going to hinder you? So there's a lot of work that can be done under, I guess, transformational change.
Okay, what is the overall goal that you're trying to achieve, and how do you plan to go about achieving that?
Well, always my first goal is to provide value, to be of value when someone comes to you in the community, regardless of whatever decision-making power they have, and they have a serious problem, and they're willing to share with you either time, resources, and also their mistakes and open up to you. My goal is to always be able to challenge people respectfully and challenge their thinking, essentially, so they can do whatever it is they're doing in a more ethical manner. I would also like to see and be a part of providing more research opportunities for youth, particularly in the Black community, because I feel that research can be very, well, as healing, it can be empowering. And it's a great tool for analyzing life, and it can be used in and out of the classroom.
And how can we learn more about what you're doing?
You can go to my website, that's intermediateplanning.com. You can also send an email to info@intermediateplanning.com. And I also have some of my work posted on my site.
After viewers have watched this show and listened intensely to what you were saying, what do you want them to walk away with?
Well, I always say that change is a science. It's, there's a lot of folks out there who have really great intentions and want to be a part of a process that ultimately leads to some sort of good. But what I would hope that people would take away from this is that change is a process of science. There's methods involved to it, and there's definitely people around who can assist and support if there's a change that you see that you want to initiate.
And finally, is there a particular community that you're working on right now?
I really work kind of anywhere. So there's not one particular community, but I will say that my love is I have a real love for North Charleston. And so I like to stay in North Charleston as much as I can, but really the work applies anywhere, even globally.
Okay, so what I'm to do, tell my viewers one more time how they can find out more information about what you're doing.
You can visit my site, intermediateplanning.com, or you can email info@intermediateplanning.com.
Okay, Ashley Krejci-Shaw, we thank you for being on Bounce Around Charleston, talking about that sustainable development. I like that. I like that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, you heard it right here on Bounce Around Charleston. Communities, it's time for change. And Ashley is the person who says she can bring about change in your community.